Who was this woman who rose in a time of fear and oppression? How did she lead when warriors trembled, when kings ruled with cruelty, and when her nation cried out for deliverance? She held no sword, no crown, and no army. Yet her voice carried more strength than the clash of weapons, and her wisdom bore the weight of heaven itself. Her name was Deborah, prophet, judge, and mother of Israel. In an age when courage was scarce, she rose like a blazing torch in the night, illuminating a path for a broken nation. But before her story begins, we must look upon the land she inherited, a land drowning in fear. The days of Joshua had long passed. The tribes of Israel, once united in conquest, had drifted into complacency. They had tasted the promised land, yet slowly turned toward the idols of Canaan. With each act of rebellion, the protection of the Lord withdrew, and the people who were meant to shine as a holy nation became shackled under foreign rule. In those days, King Jabin of Canaan reigned in Hazor, and his ruthless commander Sisera held dominion over the valleys. 900 iron chariots thundered across the land, weapons so fearsome that villages fell silent at the mere sound of wheels on stone. Highways were abandoned, travelers hid in the shadows of hills and forests, and farmers abandoned their fields. Mothers wept for sons dragged away as slaves, and warriors laid down their spears in despair. The songs of joy that once filled the vineyards were gone, replaced with whispers of hopelessness. It was an age of darkness, an age when the people cried out to heaven, pleading to know if the God of their fathers had forgotten them. But heaven had not forgotten. Though men faltered and leaders failed, God raised up a woman to stand in the gap. She did not dwell in a palace or lead from the camp of soldiers. Instead, she sat beneath a palm tree in the hill country of Ephraim, where men and women from every tribe came seeking judgment, wisdom, and the word of the Lord. They called it the Palm of Deborah. There, in the open air, she settled disputes with the insight of a prophet. Her words cut through falsehood, restored justice, and guided the people back toward God. And as the cries of her people grew louder, Deborah knew the time of deliverance was near. Under the shade of the Palm of Deborah, the people brought their disputes, and the prophetess listened with patience and wisdom. Yet even as she judged the matters of daily life, her spirit was restless. The cries of Israel's oppression echoed in her prayers, and the word of the Lord pressed heavily on her heart. One day, as the petitions ended and silence fell around her, Deborah spoke with authority, her voice carrying far beyond the branches of the tree. The Lord had spoken, and his command was clear. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, a respected warrior from Kadesh in Naphtali. When he arrived, weary from the burdens of his people, Deborah's eyes met his with a fire that came not from herself, but from heaven. "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you?" she declared. "Go, gather 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them to Mount Tabor. For the Lord will draw out Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops, and deliver him into your hands." The words were clear, yet Barak hesitated. He had seen Sisera's iron chariots tear through villages. He knew the terror in the eyes of farmers who had fled from battlefields drenched in blood. For years, Israel's warriors had been crushed under the weight of Canaan's strength. To march against Sisera seemed like walking willingly into death. With honesty that trembled on his lips, Barak answered, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you do not go with me, I will not go." The people around them murmured in disbelief. A commander admitting fear, yet Deborah did not rebuke him with scorn. Instead, she spoke with the certainty of prophecy. "I will surely go with you," she said, her voice steady as stone. "But because of the way you are choosing, the honor will not be yours. The Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Barak lowered his eyes, humbled, but resolved. If Deborah would walk beside him, then he would march, even against Sisera's chariots. And so, under Deborah's guidance, the call to battle went out across the hill country. Messengers ran through villages, rallying men who had long hidden in fear. One by one, the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun responded. Spears and swords long left to rust were lifted once more, not in the strength of men, but in the hope that the Lord would fight for them. The campfires of Israel began to glow again in the night. and the sound of footsteps filled the valleys as warriors gathered at Mount Tabor. But in the distance, beyond the mountains, Sisera and his chariots stirred. The thunder of iron wheels was not far away. The clash between faith and fear was coming, and Deborah the prophetess stood ready. The call went out, and men from the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali left their villages to answer. 10,000 warriors gathered, each carrying what little weapons they could find. Some held rusted swords, others carried wooden spears, many bore only farm tools reshaped for battle. They were not seasoned soldiers. They were shepherds, farmers, and craftsmen. Yet in their hearts stirred a courage long dormant, awakened by the voice of a prophetess. At the foot of Mount Tabor, their campfires burned against the night sky. The mountain loomed above them, its slopes rising like a sentinel watching over the plain. The men whispered around the fires, speaking of Sisera's chariots, of the storm of iron that would soon thunder across the valleys. Fear weighed heavily, but hope was not gone, for in the center of their camp stood Deborah. She moved among the men with calm authority, her words steady, her presence unshaken. Where fear darkened faces, she spoke courage. Where doubt whispered, she reminded them of the promise of God. "This is not your battle," she told them. "The Lord himself will go before you. He will draw out Sisera and his armies. He will fight for his people." Beside her stood Barak, silent but resolute. His eyes swept over the faces of the men who had answered his call, and though the odds were against them, he found strength in Deborah's unwavering confidence. From the valleys below, scouts brought news. Sisera had heard of their gathering. His chariots were already rolling out from Harosheth Hagoyim, iron wheels grinding against stone, horses snorting, soldiers marching in long columns. 900 chariots gleamed like blades in the sun, a terrifying force of metal and power. Yet Deborah did not flinch. She lifted her gaze toward the dark horizon, and her voice rose with conviction. "March on, my soul, be strong, for the Lord will deliver Israel this day." Her words echoed in the hearts of the men, and the air seemed to tremble with the weight of prophecy. Around them, the mountains stood firm, and above them, the heavens gathered clouds as though creation itself was preparing for what was to come. The men of Israel tightened their grips on spears and swords. They knew the clash was inevitable. The roar of iron was drawing nearer. The storm of war was coming, and Deborah, the mother of Israel, stood ready to lead her people into destiny. The morning broke heavy with silence. Mist rose from the plain below Mount Tabor, curling like a veil across the valley. The men of Israel waited, their breaths unsteady, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Somewhere beyond the haze, the thunder of Sisera's chariots was coming. Then it began. A low rumble at first, like distant thunder. The ground trembled, and soon the full force of Canaan's army appeared. 900 iron chariots glinted in the morning light, their wheels grinding against stone, their horses snorting clouds of breath. The sight was enough to break the courage of any man. Farmers with simple spears stood frozen, watching as the earth shook beneath the advance of a war machine greater than anything they had ever faced. Barak's hand tightened on his sword. Around him, fear threatened to unravel the resolve of his men. Yet before doubt could claim them, Deborah stepped forward. Her voice cut through the noise, steady and commanding. "Up! This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" The words ignited something in their hearts. Barak gave the signal, and the men of Israel surged down the slopes of Mount Tabor. Their cries rose in unison, a shout of defiance against the iron that sought to crush them. The valley erupted into chaos. Spears clashed against shields, swords struck, men fell, and the iron chariots thundered forward. But then the unexpected came. From the heavens, dark clouds gathered. A storm swept across the valley, winds howled and rain poured down in torrents. The dry riverbeds swelled into raging streams, and the mighty Kishon River roared to life. The ground turned to mud beneath the weight of the chariots. Wheels sank deep, horses stumbled, and Sisera's greatest weapon became his downfall. The chariots, once unstoppable, floundered in the mire. Soldiers leapt from their sinking wagons, scrambling in panic. The iron that had struck terror into Israel now rusted in the rain, powerless before the hand of God. Israel's warriors, fueled by courage and divine strength, pressed the attack. They swept through the enemy ranks, striking down those who had oppressed them for 20 years. Shouts of victory rose above the storm as Canaan's army scattered. Sisera himself leapt from his chariot, abandoning the machine that had once made him invincible. Alone, soaked by the rain, his eyes filled with fear, he fled on foot across the plain. The Kishon River carried away the bodies of the fallen, its waters swelling with the tide of deliverance. What had begun as Israel's certain defeat had turned into a stunning victory. And in the heart of the battlefield, beneath the storming heavens, Deborah's prophecy rang true. The Lord had fought for Israel. The battlefield was drowned in rain and blood. Israel's victory was certain, yet Sisera, the commander of Canaan's army, slipped away. His once proud chariot lay abandoned in the mud, the iron wheels swallowed by the Kishon River's flood. Alone and desperate, he ran through the wilderness, his footsteps heavy, his heart pounding with fear. He sought a place of refuge, somewhere far from the swords of Israel. At last he came upon a quiet tent pitched near the oak trees of Zananim. It belonged to Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, a clan at peace with King Jabin of Canaan. To Sisera, it seemed a safe haven. Jael stepped from the tent as the weary commander approached. Her eyes, calm and steady, studied the man whose chariots had once ruled the valleys. He begged her for shelter, his voice trembling. "Please, give me water. Hide me from my pursuers." Jael's gaze did not falter. She nodded and welcomed him inside. Instead of water, she offered him warm milk, rich and comforting, and covered him with a blanket as though she were shielding him from the storm outside. Sisera's breath slowed. His eyelids grew heavy. He believed he had found safety. "Stand at the entrance," he muttered drowsily. "If anyone asks if I am here, tell them no." And with that, exhaustion overcame him. The mighty commander of Canaan fell into a deep sleep. But Jael's heart was not aligned with Canaan's cruelty. She knew that Israel's God was moving, that this man was an enemy of the people of the Lord. Quietly, she took a hammer in one hand and a tent peg in the other. With steady steps, she approached the sleeping general. The winds outside howled, the last echoes of the storm fading into silence. Inside the tent, Jael raised the hammer. With one swift, decisive blow, she drove the peg through Sisera's temple into the ground. The terror of Israel was no more, not by the hand of Barak, nor by the might of Israel's soldiers, but by the courage of a woman whose tent stood on the path of a fleeing tyrant. Soon after, Barak arrived, pursuing Sisera. Jael stepped from her tent, her voice calm, her eyes unwavering. "Come," she said. "I will show you the man you are looking for." He entered, and there lay Sisera, lifeless, defeated, slain by the hand of a woman, just as Deborah had prophesied. The honor of victory did not belong to Barak, nor to any warrior, but to the Lord, who had delivered Israel in a way no man could have foreseen. News of Sisera's fall spread quickly across the land. From the valleys of Jezreel to the hill country of Ephraim, the people of Israel lifted their voices in praise. The shadow of Canaanite oppression had been broken, and a new dawn was rising over the nation. In the midst of this victory, Deborah and Barak sang a song, a hymn of triumph that would echo across generations. It was not a song for their own glory, but for the God who had fought on behalf of his people. When the princes in Israel take the lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, praise the Lord. Deborah's voice rang like the sound of a trumpet. She praised the tribes that had answered the call, men who left their homes and risked their lives to stand against Sisera's chariots. She remembered those who had not come, tribes who lingered in their ships, who stayed among their flocks, unwilling to fight. Their absence was a scar upon the nation, but their refusal only magnified the courage of those who had risen. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel. Deborah's words painted the battlefield as more than a clash of men. It was the heavens themselves that fought for Israel. The storm, the raging waters of Kishon, the mud that swallowed iron, all were weapons in the hand of the Almighty. Then her song turned to Jael, the woman whose courage had ended Sisera's life. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed of tent-dwelling women. She described the moment with unflinching truth, Sisera asking for water, Jael offering milk, and the hammer striking as he lay still. The glory of victory was not in strength of arms, but in the unexpected obedience of a woman who chose God's side. Her voice rose higher, recounting the despair of Sisera's mother, waiting at the window of her house, wondering why his chariot delayed. Her attendants reassured her, whispering lies of plunder and spoils. But the truth was already sealed. Her son would never return. The song closed with a cry that pierced the ages. So may all your enemies perish, Lord. But may all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. And so Israel rejoiced. Villages flourished once more, highways filled with travelers again, fields burst with harvest, and the land enjoyed peace for 40 years. It was not the sword of Barak, nor the might of Israel's armies that secured this victory. It was the voice of a prophetess, the courage of a woman, and the power of the God who hears his people's cries. The songs of triumph faded into memory, but their echo lived on in the hills and valleys of Israel. For 40 years the land enjoyed peace. Villages once abandoned came back to life. Markets reopened. Families tilled their fields without fear, and the highways filled again with travelers. Children grew up not under the shadow of iron chariots, but beneath the promise of freedom. At the heart of this transformation stood Deborah. She did not claim the glory of a queen, nor wear the crown of a ruler. She was not remembered for conquests or riches, but for the strength of her faith and the certainty of her words. She was known as a prophetess, a judge, and a mother in Israel. Her wisdom was sought long after the victory at Kishon. Under the palm tree that bore her name, she continued to guide her people with fairness, counsel, and prophetic insight. Leaders and elders respected her. Families trusted her. And the people of Israel knew that as long as Deborah stood among them, the voice of God was never far. Her leadership broke every expectation of her time. In an age where men carried the sword, God chose a woman to carry his word. Where generals hesitated, she spoke with confidence. Where warriors trembled, she stood unshaken. Her strength was not in armies, but in obedience to the Lord. Generations later, her name would still inspire. Deborah became more than a judge. She became a symbol of courage, faith, and divine purpose. She was proof that God does not measure greatness by gender, status, or power, but by the willingness of a heart to say yes when he calls. The people of Israel knew this truth well. They had been delivered not by chance, not by the might of numbers, but because God had raised up a woman who was willing to lead when no one else would. And so her legacy lived on, shining like the sun after a long night, reminding Israel that deliverance comes not from human strength, but from the God who answers the cries of his people. Centuries have passed since Deborah sat beneath her palm tree, yet her voice still echoes across time. Her story is not confined to ancient scrolls or dusty records of battles long ago. It speaks to us today, in a world where fear often overpowers faith, where compromise seems easier than conviction, and where many question whether one life can truly make a difference. Deborah's life answers that question with certainty. She shows us that true leadership is not about power, wealth, or position. It is about obedience to God's call. She had no throne, no army, and no crown, yet her faith turned the tide of a nation. Her courage speaks to those who doubt their own strength. She reminds us that God can raise up anyone, man or woman, young or old, to accomplish his purpose. What matters is not who we are in the eyes of the world, but who we are when we listen to the voice of God. Her story challenges us to stand firm when others hesitate, to speak truth when silence is easier, and to trust God's promises even when the odds are against us. Deborah reminds us that peace, justice, and deliverance are not won by human strength alone, but by faith that moves us to action. Like Deborah, we live in a world filled with uncertainty. We see injustice, oppression, and fear, but just as God raised her to shine in a dark time, he calls us to rise with courage, to lead with integrity, and to believe that one faithful life can inspire many. Deborah was a judge, a prophetess, and a mother in Israel. But more than that, she was a servant who trusted in her God. And because of her faith, a nation was delivered, and generations were changed. Her story still whispers the same truth today. Courage is stronger than fear, obedience is greater than doubt, and one voice, lifted in faith, can light the path for an entire people. This is the legacy of Deborah, the woman judge of Israel. Deborah's story is more than history. It is a mirror reflecting the qualities God values in His servants. Her life teaches lessons that remain as powerful today as they were in the days of Israel's oppression. First, Deborah shows us the power of faith in dark times. When the nation trembled before Sisera's chariots, she stood firm in the promise of God. Where others saw iron and fear, she saw only the certainty of God's word. Faith gave her vision when fear blinded everyone else. Second, Deborah reveals the strength of courageous leadership. She was not a soldier, yet she walked with warriors into battle. She did not shrink from the responsibility of leading men twice her stature, because she knew the authority was not her own. It was the Lord's. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to obey in spite of it. Third, Deborah's humility speaks louder than her victories. She never claimed the glory of the triumph at Kishon. She lifted her voice only to honor the God who had given Israel deliverance. Even when the honor went to Jael, Deborah rejoiced in the fulfillment of God's prophecy rather than seeking credit for herself. Her humility magnified God's greatness. Fourth, she embodied wisdom, rooted in obedience. She judged disputes, gave counsel, and spoke prophecy, but everything she declared was anchored in the word of the Lord. Deborah's wisdom did not come from books or titles, but from listening to the voice of God. And finally, Deborah was a symbol of hope and restoration. At a time when villages were abandoned, she called Israel back to life. She reminded them that God had not forgotten His people, and through her leadership, the land knew peace for 40 years. Her character proves that greatness in God's kingdom is not measured by strength of arms, wealth of possessions, or the applause of men. Greatness is measured by faithfulness, by the courage to believe, the humility to serve, and the obedience to act when God calls. These lessons are not bound to the ancient world. They are timeless truths, written not only in the pages of Scripture, but in the lives of those who choose to follow God with the same devotion Deborah carried. The story of Deborah does not end beneath the palm tree or on the battlefield by the Kishon River. Her voice continues to echo through the ages, carried on the winds of history, calling us to remember what God can do through a single faithful servant. She was not born to power, yet she ruled with wisdom. She did not wield a sword, yet she inspired warriors. She did not sit on a throne, yet kings and generals listened when she spoke. Deborah's greatness lay not in what she possessed, but in the God she obeyed. Her story reminds us that God raises leaders in unexpected places, under palm trees instead of palaces, through women when men falter, through shepherds, prophets, and even those who seem least likely in the eyes of the world. For the Lord does not measure as man measures. He looks for hearts willing to trust, to listen, and to obey. Even now her life speaks. It tells us that courage is stronger than fear, that humility is greater than pride, and that one voice, lifted in faith, can ignite the hope of an entire people. So let Deborah's legacy inspire us today. In moments of doubt, remember her faith. In times of fear, recall her courage. And when the world seems dark, hear her song rising like the sun. March on, my soul. Be strong. For as long as that cry endures, the story of Deborah, the woman judge of Israel, will never fade.